This is the second of the three passion predictions that Jesus gave. You remember last week we heard one. And that was done very publicly. This week, he's kind of pulling his friends aside. He's re-entered Jewish territories in Galilee. He winds up in Capernaum, which was probably their base of operations, so they're back up. And we can imagine that as they're coming from one territory to another on those dusty roads, you probably see James and John and maybe a couple of others saying, oh, I'm going to be on his right side. No, I'm going to be on his right side. Well, don't you remember? I brought these many people in and healed this. Yeah, but I raised the dead. You know, things that we often do in competing for hierarchy. Now, it was very important in that day and age to have, it was an honor code that society worked on. We've kind of gotten away from that. We've individualized ourselves so much that we've sort of drifted away from honor code. There are parts of the world that still work on that basis, and we're often scandalized when we hear news reports about honor killings. So there are large swaths of the world that still operate on this basis. So it's not unusual that the disciples would try and sort out who had the greatest honor. It would have been culturally appropriate. The other thing is, you'll notice this is the shortest of the passion predictions out of the three in Mark, and they're still confused. So they're afraid to talk to Jesus about this passion prediction, because you'll remember in the first passion prediction, we discussed what their image of Jesus should be. You know, there's a thing called projection, and we project personalities onto other people. And you and I do that to this very day. You ever get an email and read it the way you think they're talking? The roses are blue. The roses are blue. We all do projection. So a couple of, this isn't necessarily gospel advice, it's good advice from a guy who's made all the mistakes in the world and called the archdeacon a pot-stirring old lady in an email that was sent out to the entire diocese. That was me. And it was Ormond Plater. If you have something of merit or worth to say, try not to do it by text or email. Seriously. It's not good for you, and it's not good for the person receiving it. Do something radical and try a phone call. Or if it's that important, set aside some time to meet with that person. Because our bodies and facial expressions tell as much as our words do about what we're communicating. Okay? So if you mean no harm and you're trying to untangle a mess, do it in person. That's a little lesson we can learn from this. Jesus kind of skips over and ignores their argument about who's going to be best. You'll notice that he sort of moves along and he does another teaching and saying that you have to be a servant. It's not about hierarchy, it's about service. And that's something that we in churches talk a lot about, and you at St. Mark's talk a lot about serving the community. So you're kind of on the right side of what Jesus is teaching. Now, I want you all to look over at these beautiful children. Aren't they beautiful? Oh man, I wish you could see your faces. Everybody had a smile when they just glanced over that. You know, other people's children will do that for you. I need you to understand why why this is a critical piece of information in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And you're not going to want to hear something. And it's maybe something you all know, but it's something you need to hear again. In the first century, children had no worth. Now, that being said, I am absolutely convinced that mothers were mothers and fathers were fathers. And there were deep, longing attachments to children. And yet, at the same time, culturally, there was an understanding that, a fatalistic understanding, that that child may not make it to their 5th birthday. And so, alongside of the care that a parent has for a child, the attachment was also a stark reality that, if I get too attached, and that was the first century. Somebody told me a story. I was saying the same thing, and not all of that. And I don't know if this is true, but it sure sounds good. That she had read or heard a preacher say that as the Christian communities were forming throughout the Mediterranean, that the pagans would take babies who had deformities. And there were probably a lot more of them than there are now, certainly as many. And they would not kill them. It wasn't infanticide per se. But they would take them to the margins of the city where the refuse was and leave them there and leave. Children were disposable. They had no cultural identity. They had no power. And all they did was suck the resources from very marginal families who had little or nothing to eat. And so one of the things that Jesus was trying to communicate very effectively to his disciples and to you is that the very least in society, echoes of you fed me when I was hungry, you clothed me when I was naked, you visited me in prison, but even deeper than that for these disciples was that when you welcomed, did you hear welcome? The little one in my name, you welcome me, and not me, but my Father. That's got power. That has weight. It's not a frivolous card with beautiful little children all sitting around like Jesus that we've all seen. We've seen tons of those cards, right? No. It is a fragile, you'll notice even in the gospel they refer to the child as it twice. Think about that. It. It might be called that on some afternoons, but generally it's called by name. And Jesus in effect is saying, this child has personhood. This child is worthy of love. And when he said this child, he meant the whole broken world. All of the world that doesn't fit. All of the world that doesn't look like you. All of the world that is hungry. All of the world that's underemployed. All of the world that's not allowed entry into, you fill in the blank. A gated community, and there are reasons for gated communities. They are. And some of them are bad reasons. I mean, who wants to have George on their doorstep? Some of y'all know who I'm talking about. George is a homeless man. And we ourselves had to deal with the least of these. And I want to tell you that George was a homeless man that has frequented this place quite a bit apparently in the past. I don't know, yeah? Okay. And George seemed relatively harmless, but he would scare people that would come to church. Now, we need to have the church a safe place for all people, not just George, but all people. And if George is terrifying people, that says several things. One, about our society, what makes us afraid? Somebody that's dirty and stinky and homeless make us afraid. I can tell you, having worked near the Claiborne corridor for a number of years, sometimes that makes sense because they're untreated sociopaths or bipolar, and there can be violence there. So what I'm telling you is this is messy. And so over several days, the police were called because people were afraid. And they were afraid for George as well. And because the way our society is organized in Louisiana, that's who you call the cops. There are no other resources. And they will in turn call EMTs, who in fact did come. And they tried to treat George, and George refused treatment. Now you and I, sitting in our air-conditioned pews, might say, well, that's terrible. Why didn't he get treatment? Well, because his entire household belongings would have to go missing. They wouldn't allow them in the hospital. I was talking to somebody this morning and said, that's as if somebody came to you and said, give me the keys to your house, you're going to lose it, but you have to go over there. Think about that. Are you willing to lose all your stuff, as George Carlin says? Our houses will with stuff. And so his stuff is very mobile and portable, but he was going to lose it. Here's the beauty of suffer the little children unto me, which is usually what we hear this called. Both in text messages as well as verbal communication, hearts were breaking for George. There was profound sorrow about George. And when you bear profound sorrow for George, you're taking up the cross and following Jesus. Okay? Makes sense. That's pretty much all I got for you. The least of these. And we ended our conversation this morning saying, there's nothing we can do. His treatment is out of our control. But we can pray. Because when you run out of solutions, you can pray. And prayer is valid. Because it speaks about who you are. When you offer yourself in your prayer and communication to God on behalf of another person, you're doing what Jesus teaches us to do. You're becoming a spiritual servant to that person. Not of the neglect of doing good works. James is always whispering in my ear over here. But nonetheless, have deep and profound passion, concern, and empathy for those who have not. And you all are living that gospel message. Amen?